there were few things which would not strictly bracket itself into constellations. So we said that they would be our independent research initiatives. So there were 3 of those: Solidarities, Grassroots Action Program, and now Molding Methods. Because discussions around methodological contours of disciplines are not restricted to, let's say, one particular constellation, per se. The other sort of vertical of this was to really look at how we can overall, over time, look towards starting an academic program which could bring out practices of interdisciplinary learning, but also orient students towards it. So then we thought about the second half of the year of a Masters in Development Practice program, which is formally starting in August from the non-residential Taj facility. So we've been talking to Dr. Tanushree on this, which is about faculty members who've joined us. Some of them are here. About how a program like that can sort of work. There is also vision of an MRes degree, which is a research program that would come about. The only idea of sort of at this point for us was to think in terms of two spectrums. One, can we have conversations within and across constellations to talk about their own work? So yesterday was all about that. We've had not done regular ways of sort of sharing the work and projects that all team members are doing, principally because it's also very difficult to get everyone together, right? So the second day, which is day 2 today, we knew that it would be a sort of a close, sort of ended discussion on a number of thematic areas we could think potentially that could change or transform into constellations of their own. So we have a panel on agrarian studies, which is one of the things that I'm very keen in pursuing this year, which is to have a few villages closer in proximity, where we initially did at the center some field work with farming communities, but we didn't have the resources at the time to really sustain it. So it would be nice to also hear from your own disciplinary spaces about what you've been doing, where ideas can, as a space, collaborate. We have centers, we have institutes, but what I'm sort of largely looking now from a team perspective is to take this forward. Shivani and me, we have been talking about what we can do for doctoral students, not just JGU doctoral students or master students, but introduce writing as sort of a way of expressing yourself for many students who find that challenging. They're not taught and introduced to academic writing courses. So we want to be that space which, whether it's teaching, training, capacity building, or more importantly, in terms of research across areas, it's a platform which allows people to come together. So it's an annual thing. We will keep doing this with every year. The idea would be to evolve. But that's pretty much it. And we could just maybe get started. Thank you.
So welcome everybody for the first panel of the second day of Swaroop. So firstly, thank you for coming here also on a Saturday morning. It's a weekend, and thank you to all the panelists as well for agreeing to be here and engaging in this discussion. So I think I don't need to really discuss, say much about the theme of interdisciplinarity per se. I think it's kind of obvious now that, it's a very important part, I think, of most of our teaching. And so I think this panel is very interesting for this discussion. Everyone here is doing very interesting work, in a sense, coming from a specific disciplinary background, but working in very different areas now. So with that, I'd just like to quickly introduce the panel here. We have Shivani Kapoor, who is here from the Center for Writing Studies, teaching across various schools on campus. And if I may say, also is essentially by training is a political scientist. So how do these insights come into the work? Then we have here Tanushree Sharma, who is a professor at the Jindal Global Business School and is also the executive director of the Center for Learning and Innovative Pedagogy. So it would be interesting to hear more about that. We have Ritam Sengupta, who is, if I'm correct, a historian by training, but is teaching in the School of Art and Architecture here. So that should be, I think, very interesting insights will come in. And lastly, we have Mansi Rathore, who is teaching here at the Jindal Global Law School and is a philosopher by training. So all these different, so how I'd like to hear how all these disciplines meld together. So yeah, so each of you would have about 10 minutes to speak. So why don't we start with Shivani? Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Dipanshu and Shamin, and thanks for this invitation to come and think with you about not just interdisciplinarity, but also the work that we do every day, where there are very little chances that one gets in the middle of teaching and everything else to think about and reflect on the work that one is doing. So thanks for that. Like Shaman said, I'm a political scientist by training and by research also. And here I teach at the Center for Writing Studies, and today I'll talk a little bit about that actually, and how is the center organized, who are the people there, what is the work that we do, and how do we see ourselves in this conversation of interdisciplinarity or multi or transdisciplinarity, whatever terms we choose to call it. So the center, and for the Jindal people here, this is, I think we need to clarify this. The center is a teaching center. It's not like the other centers, which are research centers. So that's one major sort of difference in the way that we work. It's a question of terminology that we were called a center and not something else, not an institute or a school or something else, but that's more a sort of institutional conversation. So it's a teaching center. We have 12 faculty on board right now, ranging from lecturer to professor, and all of them come from a range of disciplines. So there is sociology, anthropology, comparative literature, political science, there is education, there's international relations. And what is very striking about this, if we look at writing centers in India, very few of them, but also writing centers across the globe, I think what is very unique about the Center for Writing Studies here in Jindal is that is its interdisciplinarity. So usually around the world, writing centers are thought of as centers which teach English, or not English literature, but teach the English language and teach writing in the English language, and are populated by faculty who are trained in English. Here we are doing something very, very different. In fact, we don't have many people except maybe a couple who are trained in teaching English, which is also helped by the fact that we have an English language center in Jindal, which is a separate entity which has people who are trained in teaching English as a second language. And so with that division, we get to, in the CWS, we get to then think about writing from a sort of disciplinary perspective. And that's another kind of way in which some writing centers across the world have thought about writing, which is writing through the disciplines, which is the idea that how an anthropologist would write about the state is going to be overlapping but also distinct from how a political scientist is going to write about the state, versus how, say, somebody who's looking at aesthetics is going to write about the state, and so on and so forth. So every discipline in this idea, every discipline has its own conventions, its own vocabulary, its own codes, and one must learn that. And while we talk about interdisciplinarity, like Shaman said, the rootedness has to come from one particular discipline, essentially, right? So every discipline has its own codes, vocabulary, debates, ideas, and so on and so forth. And writing from the disciplines, this idea understands that one needs to learn that. And so what we do at the center then is that we all come from these very sort of rooted disciplinary and research contexts. All faculty members do their own kind of research as well in their own disciplines, in their own research areas. But when they come to teach writing, they really think of not just their disciplinary position, but also the disciplinary position of the classroom that they are in, right? And which is where what Charmin was saying, I think CWS is the only teaching entity in this university which teaches across 8 schools. And so we are essentially teaching across 8 disciplines, including we teach in the PhD program, and the PhD classes are multidisciplinary by their very nature. So in the first semester, all PhD students of the university do 5 common courses, one of which is academic writing. And so we teach in single discipline classes, like say a BA political science class, or a BA in global affairs class, or a BA in economics class. We also teach in the masters, we then teach in interdisciplinary BA classes like in JSAA, where there is a mix of interior design, architecture, and urban design kind of students coming together. We then also teach in interdisciplinary master's programs like public policy, MADLB, which is diplomacy, law, and business, which again is inherently interdisciplinary by nature. And then we teach in the PhD program, which has everybody from business to law to political science to IR coming together in one class for one kind of training in academic writing. So what is very interesting in the way that CWS is currently working then is that while we approach writing and reading from our disciplinary perspectives and those of the class. So if I'm teaching a BA sociology class and I come from political science, at one level, that one negotiation needs to happen. You know, what do the students want to learn and read this semester? Sometimes they might say, we are very bored of sociology texts. Can you teach us something different? You know, your discipline would be nice. Happens a lot in economics, happens a lot in law, where students are like, we do this in all our other courses. Can you please teach us some anthropology? Or there are disciplines, especially at the master's level, where students will say, oh, we can't divert. So no, we don't have the time and the energy to look at another text or another discipline right now. Can you please teach us something from international relations, right? Or from public policy? And so that's one level of interdisciplinary pedagogy that we do between our discipline and the class that we've been placed in that semester. It's not always a neat combination that I will only teach political science. The other level of interdisciplinarity, which is very, very interesting for us, is because there is no set writing pedagogy in India or in the world. In the world, what we have is, like I said, those programs where English is taught as a second language, or there is basic sort of, what the US universities call the 5-para essay kind of thing, but we are doing so much more than that in our classrooms, and those models don't really work for us here. So because there's no set pedagogy, there's no syllabus that we fall back on, here in 7 years of CWS, we've really learned from each other's classrooms. And so whatever occasion we get, we also then, the faculty also sit down and talk to each other, look at each other's repertoire, look at each other's classrooms, and learn by practice and see what is it that we are doing, right? So we could have a sociologist on board who is then sort of trying to understand how can I bring in poetry into my class, and taking help from other faculty who are trained in, so we have a faculty who's trained in creative writing, and we might take help from them and say, okay, so here is a bunch of students who's not very interested in reading a 30-page essay, or they are not being able to read a 30-page essay. What can I do, right? We also have other kinds of examples. I mean, Ritam is here, and we've done this in JSA quite a lot, where the architecture students work a lot with materials. They work a lot with objects. They work a lot with descriptions. And one feedback that we've always got from JSA is, teach them how to write good descriptions. Now, we never thought that those of us who are trained in sociology or anthropology will find it very interesting to teach in JSAA, because descriptions is what brings us together, right? The thick description idea. Some of us, so it's, you know, every semester that we do it, we discover these little linkages where we find that some part of our training is helping this set of students, and so on and so forth. So it's many levels and layers of interdisciplinarity that CWS functions on. And a lot of this impulse comes from our students, who constantly then challenge us and ask us questions and say, oh, this is what we want to learn and that is not what we want to learn. So that's one kind of experience we have had, yeah. I think I can say more when the discussion happens. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you, Shivani. And first of all, thank you, Professor Dipanshu, and thank you, Shamin, for inviting me here. So I would take your liberty to travel through times and places before coming down to my own center and what we aspire to do here. So some of my historian friends and scholars of history have told me that, Renaissance, which led to the modern world, actually created all breakthroughs through collaborations, right? They said artists studied anatomy, political thinkers studied philosophy, right? Scientists used mathematics. So Renaissance as a period is not only a benchmark for creative excellence that was achieved in that period, but also a testament to the importance of people coming together to create something huge, something groundbreaking. Now, this particular phenomena has also been captured by Johansson. He's written a book, The Medici Effect. And in that book, he talks about, why these earth-shattering or groundbreaking breakthroughs or innovations happen at the crossroads of disciplines. And he, in a way, argues that, when people come together, they gather together, cross-pollination happens, and the ideas that emerge there cannot be generated or cannot emerge if a person remain glued to one's own disciplinary identity or knowledge. It's very important. Now, this thing has become all the more important now, given the kind of challenges we are facing. Artificial intelligence is the newest of all. We have been talking about climate change for ages now, social equity. I really don't know since when. So, if you look at these challenges, what they call for creative thinking. They call for, very extensive understanding of different disciplines to come out with some solution which can address these wicked problems, as we call them, which is very difficult to be solved. So, and I would not be surprised if there might be a connect between what the World Economic Forum time and again emphasize on, that is inculcating the new age skills among students, which we also call as, the 21st century skills like creativity, collaboration, critical thinking. Now, all of these skills actually, combination of this would call for an innovative mindset. That is very, very essential. So now we are looking from the perspective of what we are here for, what we are here to, achieve. It's not only to teach, but to ensure that our students learn these skills. Our students are able to imbibe or inculcate these skills. The industry has recognized it long, long ago. That's why they always talk about innovative mindset. Whether you talk about Google, you talk about Apple, or any industry for that matter, right? If you remember Steve Jobs, there's a very famous quotation of Steve Jobs. I'm sure you must have read about it or heard about it before. I quote, he said, "Technology isn't enough. It is technology married with the liberal arts, technology married with the humanities makes our hearts sing." And that is so true. So everything is happening, right? as Professor Dipanshu has rightly said, that this is nothing new. We have been talking about this for ages now. What about academics? What about higher education? What about educational institutions then? So there is a lot of research, and there is one famous study also by Harvard Business Review, in which they studied thousands of research papers and kind of reached to a conclusion that those papers which use some multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary approach to respond to their research question, right? They were heavily cited, or they were likely to be cited more, and also drive innovation. And when it comes to teaching and learning, there is this cognitive science and cognitive psychology which we talk about. And it says that, when a person is exposed to multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, I would not yet get into the transdisciplinary thing yet, that, they are able to form deeper connections in their memory, the chunks, they become bigger, and there are more connections which help them develop these skills like critical thinking or creativity better, which is all about connecting the dots. So if that is the case, where are we and what are we doing? It actually calls for a serious introspection first. Though at our university, one thing's come, very naturally to us. That is multidisciplinarity, because we have different schools, right? And if we look at each school also, mine is a business school. Ideally, we should only talk about business. But then we also teach our students sociology, psychology, philosophy. So this multidisciplinary is rooted, and it is rooted within each school, right? Yes, we do have cross-electives. Now, you would say these cross-electives actually are interdisciplinary. I'm sorry to say that. We still are a little away from making our cross-electives even interdisciplinary. Our cross-electives are just those electives which are primarily designed by one faculty for their own cohorts, for their own school. And we think, fine, these students might also like to read it, no harm, opening it to them also. So if that is the case, then it still remains multidisciplinary and not interdisciplinary. It will become truly interdisciplinary if faculty members from two different schools, they come together to create a new course, right? Environmental economics, so on and so forth. There's so many things coming together, brainstorming, and merging these two together to address a problem. It's only when you generate some kind of pedagogical innovations, you will actually let that interdisciplinarity come in, right? So devising innovative assignments which mirror real world, as we were talking about it, which would actually invite students to think of different discipline to address them. Bringing environment and economics together, as I just said, bringing AI and psychology together. So those kind of things, we actually need to give a serious thoughts to the way we are crafting, we are evolving our cross-electives. That would be the first point. And I would rather say that there is one thing which is more practical that we can do that. Since I'm a student of pedagogy also now by choice, I look at these things through a very critical lens. So within the school itself, there is a possibility which we are not seizing. And that possibility is creating these assignments. Right. No problem. Please make yourself comfortable. It's absolutely fine. So I was just talking about this interdisciplinary thing. First thing is to revisit the way we create and evolve our cross-electives. Secondly is, let's look within each school now. See, our idea is interdisciplinary, ensuring that different disciplines merge. So when I look at my own school, I'm just citing one example. We are working in silos, and it's not true only for JGBs, it's true for any other school for that matter, right? Even courses don't speak to one another while evolving their courses. I'm not talking about silos in some other sense, but then silos in terms of, the pedagogical collaboration. Two courses can come together to create one nice assignment, right? Learning does not happen just by sitting in the class and, absorbing some content or discussing about it. Learning happens when they work on some project also, which is like experiential learning, which is all the more effective. Right? So can two courses come together and design one common assignment for students? Now this would also lessen the load of students, and they would have more time to complete that particular assignment, and hopefully they should be able to do it better, right? Rather than just looking at it on the surface, dig a little deeper, because they have to merge two things together. Fine. I mean, HR can partner with, for that matter, finance to design one assignment, but real assignment, not for the sake of developing assignment for grading students. So we need to, again, go back and look at the purpose, why we are doing what we are doing. And if there is a need to do something differently, why? And then we need to come to how. So that is the first step. And then would be, collaboration between and among schools in form of, cross-electives, or maybe, the way you were doing, I was going through the outline, which was kind of shared with me. Your program in development studies look like that, right? I mean, we try to make it more interdisciplinary in nature. So, and incidentally, what is, just last 1 minute, I'll quickly complete it. So, incidentally, it has so happened that we created one workshop for our colleagues from JSPC, right? And the title of, or the theme of rather, the program was developing innovation mindset, or innovation mindset in education. It actually calls for, number one, challenging the status quo. And before challenging the status quo, it is very important to create a sense of urgency. We are not realizing it. Realization perhaps is there. We are all aware, as Shaman has rightly said in the beginning, the realization is there, the awareness is there, we all know about the importance, but the sense of urgency is missing, right? There's no urgency. There's still this very traditional and conventional way of teaching that is happening. So we need to create a sense of urgency, and that's where my center can pitch in. Conducting workshops where we encourage faculty colleagues to challenge the status quo. And challenge the status quo is not only about challenging something which is external to you. The set-in systems and practices and policies and procedures and whatnot. I mean, challenging the status quo is also challenging your assumptions and paradigm and your comfort zone. Because if you want to do things differently, you need to move out of comfort zone. And then we can talk about pedagogy then, which could be problem-based learning, which could be project-based learning, which could be phenomenon-based learning, which has already been started by some of the schools in, if I'm not wrong, either Norway or Finland. So, and, the workshops like this, I'm not workshop, but the roundtable kind of thing that we are doing, perhaps, are a good start to initiate that internal dialogues. So congratulations to you, and with this I end my introductory little long remarks. So thank you for being patient. Over to you.
So yes, thank you Shivani and Tanushree for that. Very interesting things. We have quick 5 minutes for discussion, but before I throw it open to the floor, I'd just like to point out two things that I found striking in both your talks. So from Shivani's talk, I found that point very interesting, that you're also truly interdisciplinary in the sense you're spread out across so many schools, constantly having to, in a sense, innovate with your pedagogies. So, but the interesting point was that it is useful to come from the rootedness in a particular discipline, and then from there move into engaging with others. I think a rootedness is very helpful, and then from there it kind of gives you an anchor to move forward and become interdisciplinary in a sense. And of course from Tanushri's talk, which is I think very useful, was you're suggesting actually practical steps towards how we can even think of bringing in interdisciplinarity in our research and teaching as well. And what struck out to me was when you brought about, when one of the examples that you mentioned was that even technology and the humanities they're always speaking to one another, whether it's realized or not. So in fact, that reminds me that there's still that one major frontier that we are yet to break through somehow, is actually interdisciplinarity between the social sciences and the physical or natural sciences. That reminds me, yes, we have seen some remarkable figures in the past, but it is by and large, these two worlds are separate. So these are just some thoughts that I have, and maybe I think we might have time for like one question or a response or comment from the audience.
I'm so glad that the conversation is happening in this regard. So I think the next step and I think this was something which Sharmin and me spoke. If you remember, Sharmin, we were having these sort of internal dialogues. So one of the things we haven't, I would say, successfully done so far is engage with schools about the nature of interdisciplinary learning and work that they are doing. Not just, let's say, in research per se, but in terms of teaching. Everybody is trained. If I've been trained in economics when I was teaching law students, and then now in a cross-elective I have students from art and architecture, journalism, and you're teaching a course in political economy, introduction to political economy. How do you make sense, to students coming out from so diverse groupings? So is there a way or a platform where teachers can also sort of discuss about what methods or what steps they've taken, which I think helps a lot in looking at the cross-elective question, which you mentioned. But one of the things I was sort of also looking at, and I think I'm glad Shivani, I think, spoke about this as well, which is on having a team of people and them reflecting on what they are doing, and then having a space within to sort of co-learn, co-teach, so with the program also, we've made sure, this is also the academic program committee's vision, that most faculty teaching a course are co-teaching, right? Even if it's a master's program in development practice, there might be certain core deliverables, but you do incubate that at the very beginning. I'm not sure if that's a sustainable long-term plan, but you wanted to start off like that. So what would be interesting to do is, through the center perspective, right, is to look at the possibility of what ideas can do. We generally plan our activities in terms of workshops or events semester in advance, so we could really think about this together instead of constantly asking constellations that you're proposing. And Sherman organized this exceptional series around history of economic thought, which I felt had such a interesting space to bring scholars from different areas. But you already have, let's say, a consortium where there are minds who are thinking of those questions. Here, I think we could create that space where those conversations start. So I think at the center to sort of ideas level, I would probably say that might be a good sort of a beginning. We could now move in towards branching that collaboration. Happy to sort of talk about this at length, but I think this is good that we are sort of looking at. I'm also looking forward to comments from Rhythm, because that's one space as a school, I believe we've not really engaged. And I was telling Jaideep about this, that this is something we need to work over this semester. Thank you.
Would you like to any one quick response?
No, go ahead, please.
No, just thanks for that, Dipanshu. That's giving me ideas already. I'll talk to you about it. But going back to something Shaman said, and I think that's very important, right? I mean, you didn't pose it as a question, but to me it sounded like a question. Is rootedness in a discipline necessary? You know, so I can talk about hiring experience in CWS, for instance. We found out eventually after a couple of rounds of hiring that inherently people applying to us or interested in having some sort of a conversation with us were people who were anyways exploring interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary ideas in their own work and research. So sometimes we've been interested in hiring someone who's like a core economist or a core political scientist, and they don't want to do this. It's scary for them. It's also unsure for them as to what would it mean to actually then teach not your discipline, but teach your discipline through writing or reading, right? So we found that people who want to do this are anyways thinking interdisciplinary. And so all of us in the center then, while we are in some discipline, our researches are going in, or our interests are going in many, many directions. And I think that's somewhere helping us to then say, okay, we are not teaching sociology or economics, but we are teaching writing, and through that teaching the discipline. So that, I think, is interesting to think about, how that happens.
So basically, I have a friend whose name's Arushi, and she's in JGBS. So obviously we choose electives and for our upcoming semester and all. So she basically chose a elective, which is basically for a postgraduate course, which is basically specifically towards that. I'm just adding, there's no question here though. So what happened was, I asked her, maybe the exams which will happen, the assignments that will come up, that will be of that particular level. But what you guys are talking about, I think it genuinely makes sense, and the implication or the practicality of it will be much more impactful with the ideas and the collaborations that you guys are talking about. Also because of the fact that the youth is ready to do it. And she told me that, I think it'll be good for her, because it was she's interested in psychology, but she's studying business. But then the fact that you talked about like how what is the beauty of it, and collaborating on humanities and social sciences and all the other things. So I think that is beautiful, and I can now also understand as a student that yes, that this is something that can proceed forward. And because I was very scared that how will she do it, but then we started discussing on disorders, that okay, what if our own family has one, or there is a student in a workplace specifically who's having something, and you're able to help out there. So I think that's a beautiful idea, ma'am. That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now, I'm glad that at least we heard a student voice here. And reflecting on what you said about rootedness in one's discipline, see, we actually need to do one more thing. It is almost sound like a paradigm shift, moving that spotlight from teaching to learning. That is extremely important. Otherwise, what is happening is we have compartmentalized knowledge. Right, but when we look at students, they need knowledge. For them, it is not one discipline, second discipline, third discipline. For them, they're acquiring knowledge to deal and navigate with the future lives. Right? So we perhaps need to shift our focus from only teaching or, covering certain course to more of learning, keeping in mind the future lives of our students. So that's that. Over to you. Thank you.
No, thanks a lot for those responses, and for both your talks. I think it's opened up a whole plethora of questions for us to really figure out from this. And I like this point about your thinking from teaching to learning, actually just shifting the perspective there. Okay, anyway, with that, I think I'd hand over to the next two speakers. Ritam, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks to Ideas for having me here. I have started teaching here a year back, and it is a kind of interdisciplinary program which our dean is trying to propose at JSA, primarily organized around sort of two maybe sort of thematics. One is sort of referring to a broader entity called the built environment instead of just buildings or architecture, that sort of thing, which now includes a program like a BA program, BDES program in immersive digital environments as well. So that's got to do with AR, VR and things like that. And there's an interior sort of program. And sadly, the urban design program is now wrapping up. And there's a regular architecture program. And more broadly around, something which is sort of referred to in the department as making, which is again taken as a very broad thing, which can cover everything from writing a paper or doing research to actually sort of more conventional ways in which we understand making, so designing something and the like. Now, how it is working out, I'm too early to kind of comment on that. But obviously, there's a degree of resistance you face in class, because I am trained in the humanities and social sciences. So that's the best I can offer, though often the department makes other demands of having to teach them somewhat more technical things. Like technical things as in, that's also an interesting sort of, so technical things would refer to, anything ranging between quite complicated software like SketchUp or whatever, but like, or SketchUp is probably not that complicated, but also, I've actually not been asked to do that, but some of the courses then you're supposed to teach can, you think that you would rather know these things. So you need to upskill as a faculty yourself. So anything between like, sort of the softwares to kind of, just documentary filmmaking, there's a lot on the plate which could be offered to the student. In terms of, just, it's understood that you won't go in very depth over it, but it's offered as a kind of skill set. Now, again, as I said, I can't quite comment yet on what this will lead to. I can see one sort of, one outcome is that I think students are taking up various things as they go along, right? Like when after they finish the program, which is partly got to do with the fact that as some of the more core architecture faculty have briefed us, it's not very, it's not a very kind of, architecture is not immediately a very good paying prospect as a career. Immediately when you enter, it's a bit like law. You start off in a kind of very junior role and eventually you make a earning proposition out of that. So as a result, this sort of multi-skill set sort of things that some of the JSA students are hopefully passing out with, it's likely that it leads them into, some sort of policy work, some sort of writing work, design of various different kinds, etc. Now, I'll sort of, in the sort of brief time, so I have been thinking about it on a more general sort of prospects. I have studied in multiple disciplines, but I identify quite strongly as a historian in a disciplinarian sense. So it does make me curious of sort of my role here and what am I doing, but also more importantly, what are the conditions of possibility, right, within which I'm functioning. So I'll kind of finish by saying a few things about that. So it does seem like there is relatively, so interdisciplinarity, as Tanushi was pointing out, is a very long sort of history. The history of disciplines, especially sort of academic disciplines, is relatively new, well, 300, 400 years. And that clearly in the present or for some time now has relatively less use for kind of nation-state project, right? So disciplinarity typically was a kind of citizenship building project for the nation-state all around the world. Also in post-colonial nations, but we can be less sure about, I mean, Sharmin will know very, like, she knows this much better than, like, so economics itself, like the planning commission was not always economist in sort of, early independence India, etc. So that kind of thing is already in post-colonial nations, maybe there's a kind of drift away from interdisciplinarity from disciplinarity, strictly speaking, as a citizenship building exercise. And that sort of drift away has seen a generalization maybe in the, I don't know, last 20, 30 years. You can say this as a kind of post-liberalization phenomena. And, well, I'm not looking back nostalgically at, well, this sort of citizenship building thing, but it's just something we need to take into account, that we are in a particular historical situation where interdisciplinarity, just minor disagreement with chemistry. It's not simply an element of innovation. It's something which comes to us from the outside as well, like, you know, from outside our discipline, from outside the university, from the market, from other sorts of forces, which again, what do you do with it? Like, you know, and so in history, for instance, you know, there's been sort of, well, all of you will know about it, and it's quite regularly discussed in the public forum, etc. So there's a claim on indisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity, whichever you call it, from the kind of right. But there's also a claim on it from, you know, from sort of subaltern groups who felt underrepresented in the sort of history curriculum, but also within the modernist kind of scope of even progressive universities like JNU, etc. So that is a situation within which we are working. So there's a kind of, you know, pull on this from the outside, the market or the state in different ways. But there's also like sort of political, you know, forces which are making a claim on fragmenting disciplines, you know. So that is where we are at. Now, just to kind of leave out the politics for now, I mean, it can go anywhere for that matter. But in the context of the limited sort of thing I have been engaged in JSA, as I said, there's quite a bit of resistance from students to enter in this reflexive, you know, this sort of reflexive relationship with making or built environment or whatever, where you say, okay, well, there's a history to it, there's a politics to it, and then so what? So I can't completely, you know, so I mean, I can't completely tell them so nothing, but this is important, etc. And kudos to Joydeep to, you know, keep bringing in people like me into the department to teach them this kind of stuff. But I think, I don't want to be too cynical, but what this seems to lead up to is this kind of, and again, that is also a condition of our times more than just an element of innovation, that kind of, you know, like you take, this is the thing, like a skill building is what we are eventually, kind of we are sort of, yeah, well, we're sort of now, as pedagogy is sort of, you know, we can't help but do this purely skill building exercise often, even when we are apparently engaged in something slightly different, knowledge building, that itself has its politics, skill, knowledge, head, hand difference, etc. But the head-hand difference now seems to work, like, you know, in a sense, the head-hand difference was sort of especially in this sort of a situation, you know, our caste society, etc. The head taking preference over the hand can mean a kind of, you know, a dominance. But the irony, and I'll finish with this, I'm sorry. The irony in my sort of context is that when I push what is apparently the function or faculty of reflection in terms of, well, what is the power element to this or something, there is a very clear kind of resistance from students about the fact that tell us more about how to make, you know, how to both go past this in terms of making do, but also making past it. This is a challenge. I mean, this is definitely something I deal with in class every day. So I'm not saying the students are wrong, I'm right or something, but that's the kind of challenge I face. And yes, if I could think closely with ideas about this, it would be great. But I'm very early in this, so I don't have too many kind of, you know, things to.
Hi. So yeah, I'll also try to wrap it up quickly. I'm gonna, you know, pick up cues from what other have spoken about in the panel, beginning with Shivani's point on, you know, as a center, and I've had prior experience of working with CWS as well, and I felt, you know, there was a greater sense of, genuine sense of collaboration that was fostered as a teaching center there, that I feel also encouraged, in a very organic sense, the interdisciplinarity aspect. And through that experience of, you know, the workshopping methods within CWS and acad writing, I was able to, you know, kind of implement them onto my other kind of courses that I end up now teaching within JGU. Even though I'm technically under law school as a philosopher, I've taught now courses in JGBS of Introduction to Philosophy, and that was a challenge. Even though I seem to be very excited initially, I get to do my own discipline, but in a school like JGBS. And thankfully, there was another faculty, and again, through genuine collaboration and shared interest, designing of the curriculum, for such a curriculum around, for instance, like philosophy for business school students. You know, then we ended up modifying it to, for instance, focusing on certain thematic areas, and then bringing in certain aspects of how is it relevant to business school students, whether at corporate epistemology, business ethics, looking at those instances from certain philosophical frameworks, whether it's virtue ethics or deontological ethics, etc. Also, during that course, we did try to do something like designing of assignments, like Tanushri also emphasized on, right? Not really up for students. And that's one challenge within interdisciplinarity, I feel, especially at these introductory level courses at undergrad, right? Students coming perhaps from a lack of familiarity within those disciplines. I cannot be expecting them to have these understandings of conceptual philosophical frameworks such as the analytical tradition or the continental tradition. I have to make it contextualized to their aspect. And that's where my question then comes, that perhaps I also somewhat sympathize with that fact that there is perhaps got to be some level of this disciplinary rootedness to then perhaps move on to interdisciplinarity, and especially if it's at entry level or introductory level or undergrad courses. Because when we talk about convergence of disciplines, yes, of course, social sciences provides a very fruitful playground for convergence of disciplines. But an example Shaman had given, it'd be interesting to something like with the natural sciences and the social sciences, right? I mean, it would be difficult for me to imagine somebody like a post-structural linguist trying to converge with or come together with like a positive biologist trying to work on something like a unified. Because there's also certain methodological differences in terms of vocabulary of disciplinary training, and that's essential as well. Unless both these scholars revise their own disciplinary vocabulary and frameworks, it would be difficult to come to a single unified research project in that sense. So there is a limited sense of commensurability within these disciplines, which kind of also dictates across which disciplines there can be greater cooperation or collaboration as opposed to not amongst others, so to speak, right? In terms of research, I find myself, I know I am a political philosopher, clearly looking at, understanding or conceptualizing political ideas and concepts from philosophical or normative frameworks. Now, even within that space, there is debate whether political philosophy deserves a discipline or and it's not just about semantics anymore, right? There are greater questions, like Ritam also perhaps mentioned, on the politics of interdisciplinarity too. Clearly, we have now new disciplines which are coming up or which have been coming up, which have now also served as mechanisms for exclusion as well as inclusion. So one needs to be cognizant of that fact as well. So if I take the example, like I'm interested in post-war justice and humanitarian intervention in terms of research, right? Yes, there can be greater sense of collaboration between somebody from political philosophy or an IR scholar, so to speak. But how are we to then determine, should we also require the engagement of a legal expert or a scholar? Right? Should it extend itself beyond political philosophy and IR onto the legal domain as well or not? Or is it just the rebranding of certain disciplines as certain identities? I mean, that's a question I'm kind of trying to understand and navigate myself into. And I find myself answering those questions with some form of sympathy towards some kind of grounding and rootedness within the disciplinary framework. And I feel in a practical sense, it might be a little more easier perhaps to approach to having the disciplinary grounding at an introductory level and then moving on to interdisciplinarity, which also fosters or is derived out of genuine or organic or shared interests and approaches that also, and one, also when one is able to recognize that as well. Yeah, so of course, further discussions can of course continue. Thank you very much.
Yeah, right. So thanks, Ritam and Mansi. I think you all have brought in a whole other range of questions for us to address in this. Now, unfortunately, we are running behind time. So while I would have liked to have an open discussion here, but instead we can take the discussion. In a sense, actually, I have questions for all of you also. So we can have that over. We have, I think, some a tea coffee break, right? But before that, we'd like to felicitate our speakers, please. So, Dipanshu, would you like to come in, please? Okay, Krant, anyone.
Let me do it for half of the time we are always Thank you.